Hi everyone, I'm the Saxophone Oracle. This week we're going to talk about approach tones. Some people call these neighbor tones, some people call these things enclosures. There's different names for it, but basically we're going to discuss how we can go about embellishing our chord tones, and we're going to look at some ways we can practice this. When we improvise, the chord tones are the notes we need to play in order to sound good. So depending on where we put them, depending on how we treat them, is what's going to show the listener we know what we're doing, we know where we are in the song, and all of that. Therefore, it's really important to know how to treat these chord tones. So different ways we can approach them, encircle them, all of that. We want to get that under our fingers technically and in our ears so that we have it in our back pockets, in our toolkits, in our improvisational toolkits, so we can put them to use when we need to, when we're making music. Today we're going to focus mostly on the major triad. So we're going to look at how we approach each note of the triad, how we can enclose the notes of the triad, and I'm going to give you a few exercises you can do to practice this and get this under your fingers. Typically, when we're improvising, we pass from chord tone to chord tone either by scale or by arpeggio. We arpeggiate it. So for example, in the key of G, we would play something like this. So up the G major scale, down the G major triad. And so between each chord tone, I'm playing, the next note in the scale. It makes sense. But we can also approach each note of the triad or the chord by semitone, and we call this a semitone approach. Some people call it a lower neighbor, a chromatic neighbor, and it sounds something like this. So it's a different color, it's a different tool we can use when we're improvising to color the notes of the chord. And we can also enclose the notes. We can approach it from above and below and put a little package around each chord tone, and it would sound something like this. Now, I know many of you have probably heard players using that when they play. It's a really great technique, and it's a way of outlining the chord or giving a special treatment, in this case, to the major triad. So the thing we have to know about this, if we're going to do that, is we've already discussed it. When we approach from below, we approach by semitone, our lower neighbor. But when we approach from above, we want to come from the nearest scale degree above the chord tone. Now, we could come down by semitone, but it doesn't sound stylistically correct. It gives it a different sort of sound, maybe a more Middle Eastern kind of sound. It works, you can use it, but typically, stylistically, we're going to use the scale degree that comes above. So in G, we go A to G, and then above the third B, C to B, above the fifth, E to D, and then again, A to G. And it's important to remember it's the nearest scale degree because it's not necessarily going to be by tone or by semitone, right? It's going to be one or the other depending on the scale. So in the case of G major, the fifth of the chord D, we come down from E, the sixth, to the D. But if we're in G minor, for example, remember the natural minor scale has a flat 6 and a flat 7. So when we're approaching that D, the next nearest scale degree would be E flat and not E. Now I'm going to show you the 6 exercises that I think we should all work on to get this under our fingers and into our ears. As I mentioned, we're going to stick with the major triad, and the very first one is simply arpeggiating the triad with a semitone approach. So in the key of C, it'll sound something like this. And of course, as with any technical exercise, we should be doing this through the entire range of the saxophone, and ideally in all 12 keys. So we did C, we could also do C sharp, for example. D, E flat, E, etc. The second exercise we should be working on, it's the same idea. We're approaching each tone from a semitone below, but we're going to skip a note. So we're going to approach the root, then we're going to approach the fifth, then we're going to approach the third, then the root, then the fifth, then the third, and so on. Very simple, like this. Now let's look at approaching them from above. So we're going to do just as we did with the lower approach. We're going to go up the triad in order, but we're going to use the upper neighbor coming from the next nearest scale degree. Again in C. Here we go. The next extension, just like we do with the lower neighbor, we're going to approach each one by skipping a chord tone. So we're going to approach the root from above, then the fifth from above, then the third from above, then the root again from above. So D, C, A, G, F, E, D, C. Now that we have the first four under our fingers, we're just going to put them all together into the full enclosure of the triad. As with the previous exercises, we're just going to skip a note. So we're going to enclose the entire triad, but starting on the root, then the fifth, then the third, then the root, all the way up and down. So there you have it, 6 pretty straightforward, easy exercises we can do to work on our enclosures, our lower and upper neighbor approach tones. As with any exercise, start doing it slowly, focus on precision, cleanliness, do it with a metronome, do it through the entire range of the horn, and ideally through all 12 keys. Before I wrap things up today, I just wanted to give you an example of how we can apply this when we're improvising, when we're actually playing music. So what I've done is I've taken the famous jazz standard, Bye Bye Blackbird, and I've played a 1-chorus solo. And for that entire chorus, I've only used the devices that we've talked about today. So lower neighbors, upper neighbors, and enclosures of the triad. And of course, you would never play a solo just this way, but I think it gives a decent example of how we can apply these techniques when we're playing. So it's not simply a technical exercise. We're going to put it to use when we're improvising. I'm the Saxophone Oracle. This week we're talking about how we can embellish our chord tones. Lower neighbors, upper neighbors, enclosures. I hope you found the information useful. I hope you found it helpful. As always, I love it when you reach out to me in the comments or by email. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. That's really going to help this community we're building here grow. Thank you as always for continuing to watch. I wish you a great week, happy practicing, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.